Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metropolis Radio. Today, we are talking about Star Wars, and more specifically, not to sound like a political cry here, make Star Wars cheap again. Here's how saving money on Star Wars movies might save the franchise as it fumbles toward a new era. Now, to preface this, this is part of a essay series on Polygon, just talking about the Star Wars franchise in general. Now, I'm not going to go over every single essay that's written because the vast majority of them are not interesting to me, but there's 2 or 3 of them that are very interesting, and this one is very, very interesting to me because not only can you apply it to Star Wars, you can apply it to many franchises going today. Star Wars is in a state of interrupted transformation. Disney's slate of films and TV events are straddling the gap between the auteur-driven hero's journey and a fully franchised system of blockbusters. Some of the individual installments are managing it pretty well. Others have, let's say, growing pains. Disney's newest Star Wars movie trilogy isn't tentpoles so much as the actual tent that most of modern Star Wars content can shelter in. Those films are divisive, a word that undersells one of the touchiest fan configurations of the online era. No shit. A conflict that drove Lucasfilm into a hiatus of consideration. And I'm going to say this, and I know some people have argued in the comments that this is not the case, but I'm going to say this again. All Disney Star Wars is legal fan fiction, whether you like it or not. George Lucas is no longer a part of the franchise, therefore anything made post George Lucas is nothing more than legal fan fiction. The controversy grew to encompass many things, but was rooted in competing interpretation of exactly what defines, quote-unquote, a Star Wars story. Is it the characters we know, the places we recognize? Is it the philosophy, the morality? And if so, whose interpretation of that morality? No, I don't think that's where the controversy the controversy is not rooted in that. The controversy is rooted in the fact that the first 6 Star Wars movies are a complete fucking story. Episodes 7, 8, 9, the way that they were made, feel unnecessary. You know, I'm not saying that George Lucas's episodes 7, 8, 9 would have been any better. However, we simply don't know. You know, there are many potential answers to this question, and only one way to figure them out. Star Wars needs to experiment. But how does a $300 million production that's expected to make back 3 to 4 times its budget both reach for 4-quadrant appeal and experiment with the future of the franchise? It's an impossible scenario. We need to take a lightsaber to this Gordian knot. We need to make Star Wars cheap again, and I do agree. It's impossible to say something about Star Wars these days without it being controversial to some, so it's worth unpacking. Star Wars needs to evolve. I agree with this sentiment. Star Wars does need to evolve. Even if it's legal fan fiction, that doesn't mean that there can't be good things that comes out of legal fan fiction. You know, Star Trek continued on long after Gene Roddenberry's passing, and Deep Space Nine is considered one of the best Star Trek shows, despite the fact that Gene Roddenberry had very little to no involvement in it. So, yes, Star Wars does need to evolve beyond George Lucas, even if that is to continue down the legal fan fiction route. Okay, get into here. Star Wars needs to evolve, not because there's anything wrong with it in the present state. I would argue there's a lot wrong with it in the present state by giving characters a bunch of backstory that they don't need. Han Solo, Boba Fett. Oh man. Got some caught in my throat there, you know? But simply because that's how stories survive more than a limited number of tellings. The versatility of long-running franchises depends on discovering which details are indelible to the story and which can change to meet the moment. Otherwise, the story itself will become a relic, fit for adaptation or remake, but not continuation. Yeah, look at the James Bond franchise. The first 20 James Bond movies from Dr. No to Die Another Day, not including 1967's Casino Royale or 1983's Never Say Never Again, because those were not made by Everything or Nothing Productions. But the first 20 James Bond movies between Dr. No and Die Another Day, none of them were sequels to each other. Then, in their infinite fucking wisdom, hey, let's reboot James Bond into a dark and quote-unquote gritty action movie hero. And in my opinion, did not fucking work. The universes of DC and Marvel Comics, the transmedia franchise of Star Wars, the BBC's Doctor Who, these are stories where creators have found ways to renew and update the basic narrative. Some of these franchises have evolved through slow, gradual change, and others through, crisis and regenerative fire. What they have in common is successful experimentation. Every new issue of a Marvel or DC comic is a new experiment in what works for those settings. Each new Doctor or Captain is a chance to lay the bones of the franchise in a different configuration and ask, does this work? Is this interesting? Is this what the audience needs right now? It doesn't seem controversial to say we would not still be talking about Star Trek if those words only encompassed James T. Kirk's Enterprise and if Gene Roddenberry et al. Hadn't taken a chance on the idea that Star Trek could work even when it wasn't about the electric triangle of Kirk, Spock, and Bones. And here's the thing. Gene Roddenberry famously hated Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, which are said to be two of the best movies in the franchise because he didn't like the fact that they showed that the Federation was more like the military. And hence, and then you continue that idea into Deep Space Nine, where, Gene Roddenberry had very little to no involvement in Deep Space Nine, is considered one of the best shows, despite the fact it was largely made after his death. Star Trek The Next Generation proved that the necessary warp core of a Star Trek story wasn't the characters, but the setting, the ideas, and the theme. And be more specific with Star Trek The Next Generation. The first 2 seasons of TNG fucking suck. It wasn't until season 3 when Star Trek TNG started getting good. And Star Wars is likewise familiar with swift leaps of evolution, as it's been through one already. We also would not still be talking about Star Wars if not for the leap The Empire Strikes Back made from A New Hope in tone, setting, characters, and moral ambiguity. Sure, A New Hope would still hold box office records and play on AMC as a cult favorite of science fiction fans, a fascinating ode to the pulp era of Flash Gordon serials, but it's easy to forget how many things are now considered inextricable from Star Wars, even though they didn't exist until Empire. Family ties between Sith and Jedi, Force visions, shadowy Force ghosts, a choice between studying the Force and making personal connections, conflicted romance, bright lightsabers in dark rooms, John Williams' The Imperial March. In its day, Empire was a controversial film. Some critics were outright dismayed by how far it veered from A New Hope's simple, upbeat hero story. The reviews were middling, and many fans were put off by its far darker tone. Some disliked the reveal of Vader's true identity and bristled at Leia's burgeoning romance with Han Solo over the more heroic Luke. Today, Empire is considered among the best Star Wars movies ever made, if not the best. It's an experiment that paid off in the long run, but to get there, director Irvin Kershner and the writing team had to take chances, make bold choices, and risk failure. Also, don't forget that George Lucas had to go back and heavily reshoot Empire. So it wasn't all Irvin Kershner. George Lucas actually played a very big hand in the creation of Empire Strikes Back as well. Not all Star Wars experiments have been so lucky. Lucas attempted to experiment with the prequel trilogy himself, prioritizing modern digital special effects technology over the practical effects and puppetry that were core to the first 3 movies, and reviewing the Jedi as much less than the image of Golden Age crusading knights that his original trilogy conjured. But here's the thing, though. If Lucas did not experiment with the CGI back for The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, CGI would not be where it is today. And I fucking dare you to change my mind on that regard. The resulting movies were flawed, generated confusion and disdain in the short term, and only earning affection in the long run. Rogue One and Solo: A Star Wars Story each have their boosters, but the comparatively weak box offices for both suggest that the internal prequel approach wasn't a steady enough foundation for Disney to rest another global theatrical production on. And regardless of your personal opinion on The Last Jedi, an Empire-like experiment in warping the Star Wars story to a new place, and Rise of Skywalker, an experiment in seeing whether another carbon copy of Return of the Jedi would please 2019 crowds, you have to admit that neither made it out of the gate untattered by audience scorn. Okay, since this author brought it up, let's call the sequel trilogy for what it is. Let's start with The Force Awakens. For sake of argument, because this could be a whole rabbit hole and we could be here for the next hour, and I really don't want to be. So let's call The Force Awakens for what it is. It is a Chinese knockoff of Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. Then you have The Last Jedi come out, and it was a subversion of everything that was set up in The Force Awakens. Then you have The Rise of Skywalker come out, and instead of rolling with the punches that The Last Jedi dealt, it decided to be a subversion of a reboot. That is all the sequel trilogy was. And again, I dare you to change my fucking mind on that. A mixed reception to the newest Star Wars film meant something quite different, however, back when The Phantom Menace and its sequel were essentially massive independent films backed with their director's personal money. And that's the difference between the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy. Right there is that the Star Wars movies effectively were big budgeted indie films, for all intents and purposes. The Walt Disney Company couldn't stomach immediately divisive Star Wars movies because its plan for the franchise rested on every installment being not merely a success at the box office, but also an emotional success with consumers as a non-controversial brand to drive the sales of books, games, toys, clothes, home furnishings, theme parks, cruises, and so forth. Well, I think they fucking failed in that department, let's be real. This is how movies like The Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, and Rogue One, each of which grossed more than $1 billion, can still send a studio on a 3-year soul-searching pause. They're failures because they didn't immediately please everyone. That bar isn't something that any work of art should have to reach, but that's the box Star Wars was put in when Disney announced its short-lived plan to produce a massively expensive Star Wars blockbuster every year. They're paying the price for pulling the cart before the horse, and I'm fucking glad. There's a larger discussion to be had about the effects of those kinds of expectations have on our modern mythology. But this isn't a what do we want from the Hollywood machine piece, it's a what do we want from Star Wars piece. And what I want from Star Wars movies is for them to stop being too big to fail. And they split up the article into 3 points. I didn't even bother reading the first two, but this point really hammers home. Star Wars thrives in scarcity. We all know that the original Star Wars films were made on a wish and a prayer, with the crew blowing up spaceships cobbled together with parts from battleship model kits, but I think we've forgotten it on a more emotional level. We could stand to be reminded that Sir Alec Guinness was the most compensated actor on that set, and that even Harrison Ford was getting more work as a freelance carpenter than as an actor at the time. It can be difficult to remember the ad hoc constraints of the original trilogy now after George Lucas retroactively covered them up with each new video format release, removing blue screen lines around pilots on Hoth, peopling Mos Eisley with extra CGI inhabitants, and in some cases digitally replacing entire actors, all in the name of more closely realizing his vision. I'll give you that. They should not have replaced Sebastian Shaw with Hayden Christensen at the end of Return of the Jedi. That was a horrible fucking decision. Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope went perilously over budget, with production costing $18 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $85 million today. Other modern action films made for around that much include Sonic 2, Shazam, and Birds of Prey. The Force Awakens budget, meanwhile, was $300 million. Hold on now, you might say Star Wars needs that money to look good. To which I would reply that Disney's first foray into prestige Star Wars television, Season 1 of The Mandalorian, cost somewhere not far above $100 million, and it's a couple hours longer than The Force Awakens. Somewhere between that $300 million for 2 hours and $100 million for 8 30 to 50-minute episodes, there is room to make many great-looking, relatively small-budget 2-hour Star Wars movies. You could even argue that a smaller budget could make the films look better. The ad hoc techniques Lucasfilm pioneered to make the original Star Wars movies have become an indelible, ineffable part of the franchise's vibe. Practical effects, efficient costumes, reusable sets, fewer CGI characters, and more puppets. This is how you make Star Wars look like Star Wars, and modern directors know it. Whoops. If future Star Wars movies only cost a fraction of Rise of Skywalker, they'd only be saddled with a fraction of the expectations. And then it becomes a simple case of the law of averages. One of them will find the key to Star Wars' franchise status, or in an even more likely scenario, multiple films will find that their smaller scope is well supported by smaller, discrete portions of the audience, like the fans who really do want to see all new characters with no old callbacks, or the fans who want less light side and dark side and more moral ambiguity. So let's make more low-budget Star Wars. Make a movie inside the volume. Make a movie that never leaves the surface of a planet or the halls of a Jedi temple, or features a cast largely consisting of puppeted droids. But above all, give the franchise the breathing room to experiment. because Star Wars has got to evolve to stick around, and evolution requires mutation, and mutation will create some failures. And the possibility of failure demands the reduction of risk. So for the good of the franchise, we must return Star Wars to its roots. We must make Star Wars cheap again. I do 100% agree, and I'll even expand this too. We need to apply this to even more franchises. If the Terminator had taken this approach, even after Terminator 2, I think that the Terminator would still be around. There was no reason for Terminator 3 to have a $200 million budget. Same with Terminator Salvation. Same with Terminator Genesis. What killed the Terminator franchise simply was that the movies were way over budgeted. And I mean, hell, look at the Fast and the Furious movies. Those movies need to be small. Remember when it started as a shameless clone of Point Break? The first movie was basically Point Break with street racers. Now it's a globe-trotting action-adventure movie where we're going to throw street racers, but we're going to turn them into mercenaries that are even better at fighting than trained soldiers, which makes absolutely no frickin' sense. Return the Fast and the Furious to when it was about street racing. Hashtag bring Fast and Furious back to its roots of street racing. And no, I don't give a shit what Tyrese Gibson says when he says that Fast 10 is going to return the franchise to its roots. I highly fucking doubt that. Because if they were to actually return the Fast and the Furious franchise to its roots, it would have to be solely about street racing again. And quite simply, they're not going to do it because, oh my god, the first 3 movies are terrible, says every normie conformie on the fucking planet. People that weren't even fans of the Fast and the Furious to begin with. Oh, but when it became globe-trotting adventure about, street racers taking on small armies, oh, that's when it got good. So not only make Star Wars cheap again, make every fucking franchise cheap again. And guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it right here. If you stuck around this long, thanks so much for doing so. And if you've been following me long enough, I'm terrible at ending these videos, so I will just see you guys next time.